All right, let's get started. Thanks for coming. I'm Sean Wheeler. I'm lead documentarian for PowerShell at Microsoft. And we're going to talk about how we do docs at Microsoft using PlatyPS. Who here has used PlatyPS in the past? Okay, quite a few. So I meant to pull this up. If you want to follow along, and give you a second to scan that QR code, that'll take you to my website where I have this presentation. So you'll be able to pull this up again at home, and everything that you, sorry. How do I tell it to pause? Okay. Yeah, you'll be able to pull up the presentation and all the demo scripts and everything that I used in this presentation off my website. And I'll be presenting this right off my website. So we're going to talk about how we do documentation at Microsoft for PowerShell and some of the history of how this works. I want to set a little lay a little groundwork for how the help systems works so that you understand where the pieces of PlatyPS and how you create documentation fit into the help system. So help for PowerShell, or the help system for PowerShell, was introduced in PowerShell version 2 and then enhanced in PowerShell version 3. Basically, the help system as it is today hasn't changed much since 3. Just minor tweaks here and there. 3 is where we added the ability to do updatable help and added the get help dash online parameter and the show window option. Show window, who uses show window? Quite a few. It has a few bugs. It doesn't show you all the help, but don't expect to get that fixed. There's 2 layers of problems with the output you get in show help, and that's one, partially a bug related to PlatyPS and how it generates the MAML, and then partially how it renders for the show window. So there's 2 different problems to solve. But let's talk about the sources of help. So when you first install or on a clean machine with Windows PowerShell, there is no help installed for PowerShell. So when you type get help for a command, it will show you some rudimentary information. It'll show you the syntax, all the different parameter sets that are available. It will list the parameters for you, and you'll get a message at the bottom that says how to install the help using update help. And that's done through essentially .NET Reflection. It's not exactly .NET Reflection. It's PowerShell's ability to provide information about itself. The second possible source of help content for script-based commands is comment-based help. And then lastly is MAML-based help, which is, MAML is the format that PowerShell uses to store the help information. So what the heck is MAML? MAML stands for the Microsoft Assistance Markup Language. It's an XML schema for help content that was supposed to be the great new thing for help. Prior to MAML, all the help in Windows was CHM files, compiled HTML. And they were very static. They were even harder to author. I did a little bit of CHM work in my day. But great user experience with it. MAML is this XML schema, and you can see an example here of what this code looks like. And imagine having to author that as a writer. And there's no real tools to help you with the XML. Now, Sapien has Help Studio, and internally at Microsoft, they had a tool that was developed early on that was really awful. And they quickly abandoned it. But yeah, it's not easy. And unfortunately, MAML really didn't take off like it was originally intended. And is no longer used at Microsoft for anything except PowerShell. There might be a few minor cases, but I noticed when I was searching around internally for information about MAML, there is no information about MAML. And the only thing I could find were DevOps work items to remove MAML from their build chain. So, but it is sort of alive and well publicly. There's a project. The original project inside Microsoft was called Sandcastle. It was a set of tools for creating MAML. And the guy who originally wrote it has left Microsoft, but he still maintains the project. And in my presentation here, I have a link to Sandcastle website. So if you really wanted to dig into it, have fun. So how do we solve the authoring problem? That's where PlatyPS comes in. Markdown is a whole lot easier to write as an author. So PlatyPS was created as a tool to help you create Markdown templates that you could then edit, fill in the information, and then convert that to the MAML format. This was started as really as a hackathon project internally on the PowerShell team 10 years ago. And as you can see, if you look at the version of it, we're up to version 0.14.2. It never really got any love. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that was never meant to be used in production, really. Didn't quite get there, but guess what? It's our production pipeline for producing our documentation, warts and all. So this has been a labor of love for me to try to get this fixed for at least 6 years, and we're finally getting some traction. Some resources allocated from the PowerShell team to create a whole new version. Jim Truer, who was one of the original creators of PowerShell with Jeffrey and Bruce Payette. Last thing he did before he retired in October was start a complete rewrite of PlatyPS. And now Aditya here has taken that over, and he's going to carry us across the finish line. So the current old version of PlatyPS has several limitations. It's really just monolithic. At the time this was written, like I said, it was a hackathon project. All the commandlets in it are script-based commandlets. There's some DLLs for handling YAML and doing the Markdown conversion. And this was all created before there were any standards for Markdown. I don't know how much you know about the history of Markdown, but it was this thing that was just kind of made up. It was based on Usenet post and email conventions from the 90s, where people used greater than signs to block quote things, and underscore characters for creating headers and all that kind of stuff. Those conventions, what was his name? John Gruber created this sort of Markdown standard, but it was really loosey-goosey. It has since, there's a consortium of people now created an organization called commonmark.org that has codified a standard for Markdown. And now there's, you have documentation for how it's supposed to work, and you have reference implementations for how to transform it, and easier ways to extend it. Because that was the first thing. That was part of the original problem. Everybody had a different flavor of Markdown. And there's still all of those, but there is now an agreed upon standard from which you can extend and deviate. So there's a little more consistency to it. So the old version of PlatyPS had this non-standard way of handling Markdown. It was all handwritten before the standards existed. And then it's this monolithic structure that only works on files. There's no way to pipeline the commands together. So you run the commands, it creates Markdown files, you edit your Markdown files, you run the commands, it reads those files and converts them to another file format. You have no way to get in the middle of that and inject or change anything. If it's not in the file, then it doesn't happen. Also, there were several other bugs, if you want to call them, incomplete information. When it created the boilerplate template for parameter information, it really didn't take into account parameter sets completely. So how do we solve all of these problems? Whoops. So enter PlatyPS v1. So we're up to PlatyPS 1.0 preview 2, and we're about to have preview 3, but preview 3 is just a minor bug fix. The creation of Markdown and the conversion of the Markdown to YAML, which is what our publishing pipeline needs, is pretty rock solid at this point. If you're creating documentation that you want to, where all you care about is the Markdown to be transformed to HTML for a web page, or hosted in a wiki or whatever, you can use this today. It works really well. If you need the conversion to MAML because you want to do updatable help or ship help with your modules, we're not quite there yet. But that'll be our goal for GA, is to get all of that working. Now we're using standardized libraries for all of the now standardized formats. For Markdown, we use a module, a .NET library called markdig. That's the same library that we use for our Learn web platform for all of our documentation at Microsoft. And markdig implements the Common Mark standard and has the ability to plug in extensions. It supports a lot of common extensions that already exist, like Markdown tables. Markdown tables aren't part of the Common Mark spec, but everybody uses them. So it supports that. It supports all of the GitHub flavored Markdown stuff like checkboxes and other features like that. And then we're using YAML.net for all the animal transformations, which seems to be the standard. Our goal right now, those assemblies are not loaded in. If you have other modules that use those assemblies as dependencies, you could have a conflict trying to load those modules. Our goal is to move those assemblies into an ALC, alternate load context, so that they can coexist side by side. There's a little bit of re-architect work to make that happen, but that's an eventual goal. I don't know if we'll get there for the GA release, but we definitely want to fix that. That's high on our list. The new module, of course, as you can see, has a new name. It's Microsoft.PowerShell.PlatyPS instead of just PlatyPS. And that's intentional too. This is a breaking change. All of the commands are totally different. And it now creates an object model that is pipelinable. And so you'll see when we get into the demos, I'll show you what the objects look like. And there's a lot of automation you could do here. And one of my last demos is you can build tools on this to do things. So I have a script I'm going to demonstrate that shows a way to test your documentation. It'll get the information about a command and all of its parameters and compare that to the Markdown documentation, and will tell you if you're missing parameters in your docs or if you have parameters in your docs that don't exist on that command. Excuse me. So let's talk about the workflow here. So the workflow in general for creating documentation using PlatyPS hasn't changed. You're always going to start with the commands that you want to document. You have to import those. Let me zoom this up. Then you create the Markdown files about those commands. There's always the manual step of having to edit that content, because all that PlatyPS can do is give you the template, the structured template. So no, it doesn't write the documentation for you. Now, if the command that you're documenting is a script-based command that has comment-based help, it's going to consume all that comment-based help and put that in the Markdown template. You may need to further edit that content for formatting and like bolding and code fencing and things like that. So there will always be an edit step. Then once you've completed all of your edits, you can convert that in many different ways. We ship 3 converters basically in the module. We'll convert it to the new format of Markdown. We can convert it to YAML, which is what our publishing pipeline requires. And we can convert it to MAML. But the nice thing is, since you have an object model to work with, you can write your own converter, or you could write a format XML file, for that matter, to render the objects how you want it. One of the things that was sort of a cool idea that, if we ever got around to it, Jim was thinking about creating a format XML that would transform and make it look just like Get Help without having to convert it to MAML. So this is a real simple example of what it looks like in the new format. To create new Markdown. So with this, the input to new Markdown command help is a command or a module of commands. So you get the module object with get module, and you need to tell it where you're going to output it. There's a parameter for help version. So this is the version number that gets stamped in the module file for updatable help. We can talk about how updatable help works here in a minute. And then with module page says, I want to create that module page. And that module page is another Markdown file format that's basically an index of all the commands. But it has some metadata about the module, and that's required to be able to build the updatable help. So you just run that command there, and it outputs, it creates a folder for every module in the target output folder. So you don't have to worry about, if you're doing multiple modules, having them all end up in one flat folder. It builds the folder structure for you. You could, I'll show in another demo, we can do that with multiple modules at once. And then to convert it to MAML, we then just have to, we have this command here, this measure PlatyPS Markdown that we'll take a closer look at. But basically we use that to figure out, am I looking at a command Markdown file or a module Markdown file? And so I'm using this to filter out my command Markdown files. I import them into command help objects and then export the command help objects to a new format, in this case MAML. The cool thing is this is really fast. So here's a list of all the commands that are currently there. So there's many more commands than the old module, and they work totally differently. And so now we're ready for our demo, dude. Any questions so far? So you would, so the question is, can you compare comment-based help with the Markdown? And with the object model, yes, you could, but really the intent of how I would want to use this is get your source of truth right and then transform from there. So if you're going to treat your source of truth as the comment-based help, get that right, and then update the Markdown from there. And there's an update command to do that that works unlike the old module. The old module trashes your Markdown if you try to update it. And part of that is the MAML conversion problem because it's pulling in the MAML. But I digress. So you could compare those sources, but then you'd have to decide how you're going to migrate the differences from one to the other. If you're migrating them into the Markdown, then you can just use our update command. But if you need to go back into the comment-based help, that's a little harder.
So also, if you add a parameter to your function, and you don't add that to your comment-based help, will it detect a new parameter?
Yes, because it's reading, it's basically doing a get command on your command, and it sees all the parameters, and whether it's documented in your comments or not, it doesn't care. It's going to output a new boilerplate for the new parameter. All right, so on the demo page here, you can see I've got links to download the demo scripts and data. So let's jump over there. Actually, I'm going to show the old way of doing this. Make this bigger. So for the old version of PlatyPS, when you wanted to document a module, the module has to be imported in your session. And so I've got a list here. These are all the modules that ship in PowerShell. And we're going to step through each of those. And if it's not currently loaded in my session, I'm going to import the module. And then these are all the parameters I need to parse to pass to new Markdown help. And it just puts everything in the target folder. So if you want your Markdown files to be in separate folders for each module, then you have to construct the path like this. And so let's run this in I'm doing this in PowerShell 5.1 over here. We'll time this. This is the old way. And it's not terribly slow. And that took 16 seconds. And if we take a look at that content, this is what you get. So you can see it's got no information about the commands. It has the syntax information, all the parameter sets, but there's no description, no examples. This is all the stuff you have to fill in. It does know that, for example, the path parameter here is in 3 different parameter sets, but what it's not telling you is how it could be different in each parameter set. Parameter can be positional in one parameter set and mandatory in another, where it could be mandatory in one and not mandatory in another. It could be positional in one and named in another. So none of that. Can get its values from the pipeline in different ways in different parameter sets. So that's one of the things we fixed. So that was 16 seconds. Let's look at the new way of doing it. So here I have the list of modules that I want to create documentation for, same list of modules. But I don't need to import them into my session. PlatyPS is going to do that for me. All I have to do is provide it module objects from the get module command. And since they may not be loaded, I'm using list available. And since I can have like multiple versions of PS readline installed, I only want it to find one of them. So you can see this is a lot less code to deal with here. And let's go over here and run the new version. Now this is an interesting thing. You'd think this would slow us down. It's searching for help for this export binary command, an import binary, because the version of the diagnostics module that it's found is the one from 5.1, and those commands don't exist in PowerShell 7. But even with the extra time to search, it only took 19 seconds. Let's see. When I did this before, I'm going to delete that content and run this again. It's going to be much faster. So 6, but things are preloaded in session. But at scale, the bigger, the more modules you have to document, and the larger those modules are, this is much faster. Emrys. It does work in 5.1. We probably need to do a little more testing than we have done so far, but that's certainly the goal. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the content here in the new format. And now we have much nicer looking Markdown. So you noticed in the old format, let me bring these up side by side. In the old format, notice all the squiggles? That's my Markdown linter telling me this isn't good Markdown, like you're supposed to have a blank line after a header and a blank line. Whoops. There. And throughout here, all of these things. So this is much better formatted. Here, we got full documentation because I had the help files installed in PowerShell 7. So it's able to read the existing help files and add that information to the Markdown. We've added a new level 2 header for aliases. So our plan here is that for a command, if that command has an alias, we'll document it in this section right here. This is an optional section, so it can be deleted from your Markdown. But if you're going to have a section for it, that information, it goes in this order. The important thing, too, I should say, both versions of PlatyPS generate these Markdown templates, and there's a very specific schema to them. And you need to keep things in the same order. You can't add extra H2 headers of your own. There's places where you can't add certain kinds of content, like you can't add extra H3 headers in most places. In the old version, examples are a real pain in the butt. It strictly enforced this thing where you could have, for describing your example, you could have 0 more paragraphs starting out, then 1 or more code blocks, and then follow that up with 0 or more paragraphs. You couldn't put a code block, paragraph, so that you could explain things step by step. Now you can in the new version. So, and if you were converting MAML, that was important, because if you broke the rules of the schema, then PlatyPS didn't know how to convert it properly, and it would break your build for the MAML step. So now we've cleaned up the schema rules, made things a lot more flexible, and we've added a couple of new things. The other thing that we changed is that in the related links section, it's now a bullet list. In the old version, you had to put each link on its own line with a blank line in between. Otherwise, Markdown would mash them all together when it renders. So now it's a much cleaner look. It's nice. So let's get into my demo here. Not a new one. All right, so I'm going to get what's going on here? I have the module already installed. Let me make sure it's loaded. Oh. This is the ALC problem. I have another module loaded that is going to conflict with it. All right, so let me change. It's C drive on the laptop, not D drive. Now it's imported. And so I have this zip file that has demo data in it that we're going to be working with. So first thing is I want to expand that. And I'm going to close this, and let's make this a little more readable for everyone. All right, so let's take a look at the object model here. So there's a command in PlatyPS version 1 called new command help, and you give it a command object. So that's the thing you get from get command. And it's going to create a command help object, which is PlatyPS's help representation of that command. So in this case, I'm getting a new command help object on new command help. Let's run that, and we'll take a look at what one of those things looks like. So that front matter YAML metadata that's in the Markdown, that's the metadata field that you see there. We've got some information about the module it came from. And you can see we have our placeholders, the fill-in synopsis, fill-in description, and so on. But this is where you now have an object that you could make changes to. So I'm going to make change to this. Let's give it a synopsis. And we'll look at it again. And now you can see. So I can programmatically inject information into the object before I create my Markdown. And this is where I'm getting information about the command from the command itself. If I have a Markdown file that documents that command, I can create a command help object from the Markdown, and now I can compare those two command help objects. So let's do that. So I have a Markdown file. Here is the Markdown file for new command help. So this is the existing documentation that I've written, and this is the old format from PlatyPS 0.14. So this is what we have here, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import that, and let's look at what we have. So now I have fully filled out metadata, and I've got a synopsis and descriptions and examples. And also one of the things that these command help objects has is a diagnostics property that is a sub-object here. So let's take a look at what's in the diagnostics. So we can see, did we have errors when trying to import this? And then there's this messages. So let's look at what the messages you get are. So from this I can see, I had a warning here about alias. The aliases header was not found in the Markdown. It's warning me that that's missing, but that's okay. It's optional, but did you intend to leave it out or not? You have a warning now that you can check for. And if there were any problems parsing any of the information, you'd get information like that. So now you can start to build tools and pipelines around validating this information. So I already did this thing, but let's go ahead and just run this because I might depend on it. So now I created new Markdown files in the new format, and we can look at those. So these are the empty ones where you have to do all the placeholders, fill in all the placeholders. But I could have just as easily, one of the things is that the new PlatyPS will read the old Markdown format and create that command help object. And then when you go to export it, it's going to export it to the new format Markdown. So it'll do that conversion for you. Now, if you're going from Markdown to Markdown, remember that the old Markdown, the parameter information was incomplete. And so when it converts that, it's just converting the Markdown. The new parameter information in the new format is only going to be as good as the old information. But there's a way to update that after the fact. So this is how you do the update. I'm going to read all of those Markdown files. I'm using the measure object, the measure command here to filter out command help files. And then I'm running update command help on each one. And what update command help does is it imports that Markdown file and looks to see what command it's for. Then it does a get command on the command and creates a command help object for it, and it merges the differences into the object model. And then we can export that out to Markdown command help. So let's go ahead and run this. And now, let's look at the differences between the two. I use a tool called Beyond Compare. Has anybody ever used Beyond Compare? I love it. I can't live without it. And unfortunately, I can't zoom it. But what I was supposed to create backup files. Let me make sure. Oh, this is comparing V1 and V2. Okay. Well, let's just see what we got here. All right, so here's the differences between the two. We have some new metadata. So you can see in the version 2 content, that first one there is document type. It says cmdlet. And we have for the module markdown file, it'll say module for the document type. So that's what that measure PlatyPS markdown is doing. It's looking at that metadata. And we have a new schema value there. And we purposely went with, the schema story on the old version of PlatyPS is a mess. There was an early version 1 schema, and then the new schema is version 2. And we started, when we originally started this project of rewriting PlatyPS, we were calling the new PlatyPS version 2. But then it would be schema version 3. And that's part of why we renamed it. It's now Microsoft.PowerShell.PlatyPS, and it's version 1. But the schema version now is date-based, so if we make changes to the schema, that will roll. Much better management story there. The alias section here got added when we did the export. Now, since we were converting from the old format to the new format, it puts it in as empty but doesn't provide the boilerplate. You can remove it if you want. In our publishing system, I think they will just remove the empty section. You can see now also there's quite a bit of difference here in the YAML metadata for a parameter. So we're looking at this difference command help parameter. And we've got a lot more information. So there are there are properties on a parameter for a command that are common to all parameters. And there are properties that can be different for each parameter set. So that's what this section here is. It's listing the parameter set. Excuse me. And then it'll be the name of the parameter set. If the parameter belongs to all parameter sets, then it's just going to say all. And then these are the properties that can be unique to the parameter set. Its position, whether it's required, how it gets data from the pipeline, and whether it supports value from remaining arguments. We also added don't show, which is a property. That's one of the ways that we flag attributes as being deprecated. And then you can put help messages on a parameter. And that's that message that pops up on a mandatory parameter when you don't provide it. It prompts you to enter some information. It shows you that help message. So there's a little bit of sort of self-documenting that can happen if you put it in. But now we have better information for all your parameters. Whoops. And you can see here we've converted the list of links at the bottom into a bullet list. Any questions so far?
For the alias tag, does that work? Does that show in GitHub as well, or only in the Markdown?
Okay, so there's two places aliases show up. You can have an alias on a parameter. You can have an alias for a command. If there's an alias for the parameter, it'll show up as part of the parameter metadata. But the alias for command is not universally discoverable. You could, at the time you generate the Markdown, you could argue that you could check for aliases, but you might have custom aliases you've created. So what should it document? There's no way to tell the difference between the alias that we created by default and one that you've added. And there's different aliases for different platforms. Like getChildItem is dir, ls, and GCI, but not on Linux. There's no ls on Linux. If you run ls on Linux, you get the ls executable, you don't get getChildItem. So you have to hand enter that information about the aliases. And since that is just part of the Markdown body, it'll be rendered in the Markdown. But you have to add that.
So can you add it also to the comment-based help as well?
There's not it would just be part of the description, the dot description. There's no schema for that in the comment-based help. So creating MAML works the same way here. We are, I'm getting a list of all of the files. I'm sending that through measure.PlatyPS Markdown, filtering out my command help objects, importing those commands, and exporting them out as MAML. Really fast. And there's this, now this command also existed in the old version of PlatyPS. In fact, we just ported it over. It's one of the few script-based commands in the new module. This does some funky magic. It basically creates a in-memory only module for the help, and then does a get help on it so you can see it. But it's a way to test. So we have this XML file that we've now created. Where's my MAML folder? Where did we put it? Should be right here. So here's my XML file, you can see. And you could tediously try to look at all of this and see if it captured what it needed to capture, right? But with the, make this window bigger, with the show help preview, what happened here? Oh, I'm piping to more. Here's all of the MAML rendered content. Now, like I said, we're not quite finished with the MAML conversion. I know there's bugs. Since MAML is largely undocumented, that's an area that's it's been hard to deal with at this point. But you get the idea of what it's going to do. Now, also realize that the MAML rendering is going to be a little bit less fidelity. And part of that has to do with limitations in the object model for getHelp. When you run getHelp, it reads this MAML information and creates getHelp help objects with all that information. And it doesn't really capture everything that should be documentable. So it's a stripped down version. The Markdown really is the full source of truth now. And we've been noodling ideas about if we could just throw out the old help system and create a new one, how would that work? And what we want to do is just get rid of MAML, just ship the Markdown and run the Markdown in the terminal. But that's not anytime soon, unfortunately. But we're thinking about it. We're seriously thinking about it. All right. Demo time. So let's take a look at some performance here. I'm going to fix this so it works on this machine. So I'm going to run update help, command help. I'm going to import all of the Markdown from my GitHub repository for the PowerShell docs for PowerShell 7.5. So I'm recursively getting all of the files. Now, PlatyPS does not work on about topics, never has worked on about topics. So I'm excluding those. And I'm being lazy about it. I'm just looking for files of the pattern star-star.md instead of running them through the measure PlatyPS Markdown. But I'm iterating across all of those files. I'm running update command help, so that's going to do a get command on each command and compare that to the Markdown, and then we're going to export new Markdown. So let's run this and time it while we're doing it. We saw a few errors come by. One of them was for a command called switch process. We have, that was added in 7.3? 3, I think. But it's a Linux-only command, so it won't find it on my Windows machine. So, but it'll still convert. All right, it's done. It took 19 seconds. And let me see here. So now I have all of these folders in my V2, and we can drill in and look at this. And so you can see this is the new schema format. And I've got my aliases block, and it will have updated the metadata about the parameters from the get command comparison. I'm trying to think of a good example we can look at. Invoke REST method has a ton of parameter sets and a ton of parameters. Yeah, so here's one with multiple parameter sets. So it's this parameter, what is it? It's custom method, or no, dash method, is in the standard method parameter set and the standard method no proxy parameter set. And the properties for both parameter sets happens to be the same in this case, but if they were different, now you have that information about how they're different. Now my last demo, the piece de resistance. This is a script I wrote called test parameter info, and this is doing that comparison I was telling you before. So you take a command that you've documented and you want to compare it to the current version of the actual command that's loaded on your system, and tell you if there's differences. In this particular case, the only differences I care about are, do I have all the parameters documented or not? And so I'm just setting up some starting points here. I got to make sure that the module is installed, and we're going to find the markdown that we're looking for. And here I'm getting a list of the common parameters because I don't care about trying to compare common parameters because they're going to be the same in both places. So I'm filtering those out. So here I'm importing the markdown, and then I'm doing a get command so the title property on the command help from the markdown I just imported is the command. So now I'm doing a get command on that command. And I'm building a custom result object here. And then if here I'm overriding the properties to say whether it's been defined in one, but it doesn't exist, or vice versa. So let's just run the example here. I'm doing this on get child item. Oh, I need to .source it first. Oh, there I go again. I wrote this on my desktop, which all this is on drive D. All right, so let's look at the results we get here. So we have some problems here. Code signing cert on getChildItem. Is it defined? It's not defined, but it's documented. Anyone know why? Right. It's a dynamic parameter for the certificate provider drive. And I'm running this in the context of the file system provider. So there are things in the documentation for all of these provider-specific dynamic parameters. They exist in the documentation, but they're not showing up in this context. So I could jump through some more hoops and try to discover all of the parameters, dynamic parameters for the different providers. But there's another way to do dynamic parameters, and that's where they're conditional to other parameters. And unfortunately, that's not discoverable. We have one of those in PS Resource Git. But at least now we have a way here to kind of validate. You could turn this into a pester test. Did I get the expected true and false where I expect them? How am I doing on time? I'm running out of content. So let's talk about the future a little bit. This, like I said, this is still a work in progress. We have no specific target date for GA at this point. We are developing this new version of PlatyPS for us first. We have internal partners. I mean, this is a crucial piece in our whole docs publishing chain for the Learn site, and we got to get that right first. Once we get to GA, we really want feedback from the community about how you guys want to use it and what problems you're running into. And if you want to contribute to it, we're certainly open to that as well. But at this time, we're not taking any contributions. You can file issues if you want and PRs, but we're focused on things are subject to change so much, so it might be wasted effort at this point. Also, don't bother filing any more issues on the old 0.14 because we ain't touching it. Some things that we want to look at is we want to add more metadata discovery. There's still some things that maybe we're not capturing that we could. Potentially other conversion types. We need MAML for as long as we continue to support MAML. We need YAML for our publishing pipeline. But beyond that, it might be cool to have an HTML converter. That's something that definitely the community could help with, because that would be easy to do. You have the object model to work with, and you wouldn't be mucking about with things that we're dependent on, right? We're not dependent on that HTML conversion, so go for it. Localization support is important to us. Right now, this is really focused on just English. And that's one of the things that is definitely broken in the old PlatyPS. If you change the names of the headers, like where it says aliases and description and whatnot, to another language, it's broken. It says you're missing, you broke the schema, you're missing this header. So how do we deal with that? We'd like to be able to support more structured formats. Wouldn't it be great to do get help dash online for an about topic? We can't because there is no object model for about topics in PowerShell's help system or in PlatyPS. And then there's how do you document things like PowerShell classes, enums, script analyzer rules. That's all nicely structured content that would be nice to have a structured Markdown tool for. So that, and we have other things that need to be finished. The MAML rendering is still problematic. The YAML conversion bugs have mostly been fixed, right? Did you get that one field out of the parameter block? And then we still need to create the cab files, zip files for updatable help. That piece is not working. A note about that too is, so cab was the format that Windows PowerShell used and expects. We still have to support that format. But if you're on PowerShell 7, it looks, and on Windows, it looks for the cab first. If it doesn't find it, it looks for the zip file when you do update help. And we'll download that. Non-Windows platforms only look for the zip because there's no native cab support for any non-Windows platform. And there's no .NET support for creating cabs. We actually have to run a Windows executable called makecab to do this. So the commandlet that builds this only runs on Windows. What I'd like to do is make it aware of when you're running it on Linux and just skip the cab part and make the zip. So that at least you could run it and get a result without an error. But again, future work. And then I've got some resources here. Links to all my examples and the existing documentation. The commands are all documented in our online documentation. So if you go over here to the utility modules documentation set, this is where we have documentation for PlatyPS, among other things, the secrets management stuff, script analyzer, all of that. Right now, this article is about using the old version of PlatyPS to create your Markdown. But down here you have the commandlet reference for the old version of PlatyPS and the new version of PlatyPS. So keeping that up to date as we go. Let's talk about the repo. Utils. So PowerShell/PlatyPS is the source for PlatyPS. There's two main branches here that, to look at. The master branch is the old code base, the 0.14 code base. The V2 branch, again, this is where it's confusing. The V2 branch is for PlatyPS version 1. I've been trying to convince Aditya that we need to rework this a little bit. And I want to reorganize. But this is the code base for V2. You can take a look at. There was a, or did we delete it? Yes, I deleted it, thankfully. So in the source folder here, Come on, open the folder. This is all the new code. Now, in the master branch, let's go back there. The docs folder here, if you go under cmdlet reference, there's, this might be outdated, but I've separated the cmdlet reference for the two versions here. So this is the master branch, but there's documentation for both. And under the developer folder, again, separated out different documentation for the different versions. You can look at what the old schema looks like for PlatyPS. And under here, we have updated documentation. The specs folder has design notes, some of my design notes, notes on the schema. We defined a schema for about files, but there's no code implemented to support it. This one here talks about all the new sections and whether they're required or not, and some of the new format. So we've tried to document this stuff, the differences between the two in here as well. But that's where you go for more information. Any questions? Anything else you want to see?
For a bit of an off-topic question, I use transformation classes often on parameters, so we accept a string or object.
Right.
How and where would you document that? Tell the user you can pass a string or a type X.
So where we've had to do that in the past, we just say in the description of that parameter, in the pros, we just say you can pass it an object of this type or a string and it'll convert it to an object of that type. Yeah, there's no magic to it. It's just, but there's no discoverability by PlatyPS. So it's the author's responsibility to document that. There's a lot of cases like that where it's not programmatically discoverable in a reasonable way. So it's the author's responsibility. That's why, somebody has to write the docs somewhere, somehow. Yeah, it doesn't come from ether. And it's not like documentation for .NET classes where you put the / comments in, but somebody still had to write those / comments. It's just that .NET will build you a documentation file that's usable based on those comments. You don't get any of that with PowerShell. Any other questions? Yes, sir. So the question is, isn't Markdown sort of native HTML already? Yes and no. Markdown is so ubiquitous. Everybody that hosts Markdown renders it in HTML. So yeah, if your documentation repository was just Markdown files in GitHub, GitHub does a nice job of formatting that for you as HTML, and you don't have to convert it. Right. Yeah, but what we do here all works with Git flavored Markdown, GitHub flavored Markdown. In fact, GitHub flavored Markdown added the alert boxes that we created for docs. So the note and the important or tip, those boxes, GitHub now supports that. Okay, so which is better use, comment-based help or Markdown and PlatyPS? There's advantages to both, and you can use both. There's some configuration considerations, and you have to decide what your goal is for the help. So how do you get comment-based help on a web page? If you convert it to Markdown, and you've got a way to publish it. So that's a reason for doing PlatyPS and Markdown, right? And PlatyPS will take that comment-based help and put it in the Markdown for you. So that's a way to get it there.
Essentially, if I wanted to add online-based help to
Right,
model, that's what I want to switch over to.
right. If you want to create a MAML file to ship with the module, then you need to use PlatyPS to create the Markdown and convert that to MAML. However, in the hierarchy of things for get help, if you have comment-based help, it's going to show the comment-based help, not the MAML, unless you use the comment directive .external help file and you point it at the MAML file. And then that overrides any comment-based help and it renders what's in the MAML file. So that's that configuration option I was talking about. And then the other beauty of using MAML and the PlatyPS process of that is you can create updatable help. So you can support update help for your module. That means you can ship new help without having to ship new code. Well, we have a little time here. So I don't know how much people know about how update help works. But let's look at the process for that. So I have another presentation on my site here where I talk about how help works. And this is the process. So when you run update help on your system, the first thing it's going to do, it's going to collect the module information. You can run it, if you run it with no parameters, it's going to look at all your installed modules, and it looks to see, does the module have the help URI property? If it has a help URI property, then it has updatable help, and it's going to try to find that updatable help. If it doesn't, it'll skip it. Or you can specify a module name and just update help for a single module. So it gets that information, checks the help info URI, and then it looks for a help info.xml file, and that's for each module. And the name of that file is going to be module name underscore module GUID underscore help info.xml. So do you have one of those in your local directory? Yes or no? If you have it, it loads that. If you don't have it, then it knows it needs to go get one. And so what it does is it takes that help info URI and it constructs the path to download the help info XML file. So if you've ever done this where you see there's a help info XML file URL and you try to browse to that URL, you'll get a 404 error. Doesn't exist. That's because that's the directory and not the file. And directory browsing is turned off on the web service. So get help actually constructs the full path to that help info XML file and downloads the help info XML file. Then it looks at the version number, and that's that version number I was talking about earlier that you can set in the module Markdown file. And it says, okay, online is version 5, and on my machine is version 4. I'll download the new version. If they're equal, then it says, okay, you're good, do nothing. This is the hard part. There's no good way for us maintaining so much content to always be bumping that, because we actually, every time we make a change in our docs, it rebuilds the updatable help. That happens daily. And so we're not changing that number. But if you add -force to the update help command, it downloads it anyway. So you always want to run update help -force. Okay, so we've gotten the help info XML file, and we've compared it. We've decided we need to download. Inside the help info XML file is another URL to tell it where to find the updatable help content. And for us, that happens to be the same URL. But it doesn't have to be. It could point to somewhere totally different. And again, it's going to construct the full path to the file. So the content files are module name underscore module GUID underscore language, so like en-us underscore help content.cab or help content.zip. And then it downloads that and unpacks it on your machine down here. The other thing is that the file names are case sensitive. And if you get the wrong case, it won't be able to find it on the web service, the data store. And this is the problem that you've probably seen with PS readline. PS readline in Windows PowerShell 5.1, the L in readline was lowercase. In PowerShell 6 and above, it's uppercase. So that caused a problem. Whoops. And then the other problem is if you've got the information wrong in your, when you build the cab files and the help info and all that for updatable help, if the information in your module markdown file is the wrong case, it's going to build the wrong file name, and then that breaks. The other thing is why there's so many modules in Windows that fail to do update help is because those module authors haven't maintained their help info URI to point to the correct location with the correct name and the whole bit, and that's out of our control. Believe me, I've beat them over the head to get that fixed, and for Windows Server 2025, we fixed about 90% of them. So anyway, that noise means we're out of time. Thanks for coming.